In November 1934, Neville Chamberlain's government introduced a bill in Parliament to increase the RAF by 41 squadrons, and not a moment too soon either. After years of neglect, the aircraft of the RAF were woefully inadequate. The Air Ministry set about drawing up specifications for new aircraft for all branches of the RAF, and sending them out for tender to all of the British aero manufacturers. Often their choices were limited on grounds of air safety, failure to meet the specs or production times, and costs being too unrealistic. Let's see what they came up with. None of these. That's for sure. The Fairey Battle Mark I. All Fairey Battle variants were named Mark Is, although unofficially Merlin engine-upgraded aircraft were known as Mark II and IIIs. The Fairey Battle was a light bomber that first flew in March 1936 after 3 years in development by the Fairey Aviation Company in Hayes, Middlesex. The prototype first flew in 1936. With a speed of 257 miles per hour and a service ceiling of 25,000 feet. The Battle carried a bomb load of 1,000 pounds in bomb base cells built into the wings, or 1,500 pounds mounted externally. It had a range of 1,000 miles and a crew of 3, a pilot, an observer-cum-navigator and a air gunner-cum-radio operator. It was armed with a single .303 Browning machine gun in the starboard wing, fired by the pilot, and a Vickers K machine gun on a swivel mount at the rear of the cockpit, fired by the air gunner. It entered service with 63 Squadron RAF in May 1937, and although considered obsolete by the time war was declared, equipped 17 RAF squadrons as there was no spare capacity in the British aero industry to design and build a replacement. Bristol Blenheim Mark I. The Bristol Blenheim light bomber was a twin-engined light bomber designed originally as a fast airliner which Lord Rothermere, owner of the Daily Mail, became interested in following reports that airliners in other countries were faster than Britain's civil aviation types. On examination, the Air Ministry thought that by mounting the wings higher on the fuselage, a bomb bay could be fitted, and they ordered such a modified aircraft from Bristol in September 1935. The Air Ministry ordered 150 straight off the drawing board, and in June 1936 the first prototype flew, proving to be faster than most fighter aircraft of the day. In March 1937 the first production aircraft were delivered to 114 Squadron RAF. In September 1937 work started on a modified version with an extended nose, better guns and upgraded engines. A fighter version of the Mark I was also built with a pack of 4 303 machine guns fitted under the nose. The Bristol Blenheim Mark IV. The Bristol Blenheim Mark IV was a light bomber that evolved from the earlier Mark I, II and III variants. Although the Mark I was already in service with the RAF, only one Mark II was built and the Mark III only existed on paper. The Mark IV had a three-man crew, pilot, air gunner come radio operator and a navigator come bomb aimer. It had a 303 machine gun in the port wing and an upgraded powered turret to take two 303 machine guns. Two 303 remotely controlled, rear-facing machine guns were fitted under the belly. The maximum speed was 266 miles per hour and the service ceiling was 27,260 feet. The range had been extended to 1,460 miles and the bomb load to 1,200 pounds. Armor protection for the crew was also improved. As with the Mark I, a fighter version of the Mark IV was also built. The Vickers Wellington Mark II. The Vickers Wellington was a medium bomber co-designed by Barnes Wallis using a metal-weave geodesic design he had perfected in the First World War while designing rigid airships. Due to changing demands within the specification, it was not until June 1936 that the first prototype flew. Following further requests for changes to the specification by the Air Ministry, the second prototype flew in December 1937 as the Wellington Mark I. A total of 180 Wellingtons Mark Is were built, 150 for the RAF and 30 for the Royal New Zealand Air Force. In October 1938, No. 9 Squadron RAF received their first Wellington Mark Is. In January 1938, work on a Mark II Wellington with Merlin engines replacing the Pegasus 18 radial engines was started. In late 1939, the Mark II was found to outperform the Mark I in nearly all areas. Top speed at 23,500 feet was 254 miles per hour with a range of 1,540 miles. Bomb load was 4,500 pounds of bombs and defensive armament was provided by 6 303 machine guns. There was a crew of 5 aboard, a pilot, navigator cum bomb aimer, front turret air gunner, dorsal turret air gunner cum radio operator and a rear turret air gunner. The Handley Page Hampden. In June 1936 the first prototype Hampden took to the air. It had been developed to the same spec as the Vickers Wellington but looked a whole lot different. A second prototype, using a pair of Dagger inline engines, flew in July 1937, while yet a third prototype using Pegasus 18 radial engines flew its maiden flight in June 1938. In the autumn of 1938 the new prototype passed its Air Ministry flying tests and at the end of September 1938 entered RAF service with No. 49 Squadron RAF. The Hampden had a four-man crew of pilot, navigator cum bomb aimer, dorsal air gunner and ventral air gunner. In order to save weight the front, ventral and rear machine gun positions were manually operated Vickers 303 Type K machine guns. Ventral and rear positions were often twin-mounted Vickers K machine guns. There was also a single, fixed, forward-firing Browning 303 machine gun mounted in the upper part of the fuselage nose. The maximum speed was 247 miles per hour at 13,800 feet. Cruising speed was 206 miles per hour at 15,000 feet. Range was 1,720 miles with a full fuel load and 2,000 pounds of bombs at cruising speed. The service ceiling was 19,000 feet. Maximum bomb load was 4,000 pounds. Ceiling was 19,000 feet. Maximum bomb load was 4,000 pounds. The Armstrong-Whitworth-Whitley Mark V. The Armstrong-Whitworth-Whitley Mark I was a heavy bomber that first flew in March 1936. Due to the designers being unused to aircraft with flaps, the mid-mounted wings compensated by having a higher than usual rake angle, and this made the bomber look as though it was nose down while flying at its cruise altitude. Following the first production run, production aircraft were used to produce later variants. As the work on the new designs were proceeding in parallel, some later variants were completed before earlier ones, so following the progression of new marks gets complicated. A Mark II variant with more powerful radial engines was flown in January 1939. There followed a Mark III variant with a powered turret in the nose and a hydraulic dustbin ventral gun position. The adoption of Rolls-Royce Merlin engines in 1938 gave rise to the Mark IV variant. It also featured a powered rear turret with 4 Browning 303 machine guns and increased fuel capacity. There soon followed a Mark V variant with modifications to the tail fins, further increases in fuel capacity and a 15-inch extension to the tail end of the fuselage to improve the tail gunner's field of fire. The Whitley had a crew of 5. A pilot, co-pilot cum navigator, a bomb aimer, and a rear gunner. The RAF took delivery of Whitley Mark I, 2s, 3s and 4s in the late 1930s, and the Whitley Mark V arrived with the squadrons immediately before war was declared in September 1939. Maximum speed was 230 miles per hour at 16,400 feet. The range was 1,650 miles with a service ceiling of 26,000 feet. Armament consisted of 1 Vickers K303 machine gun in the nose and 4 3.03 Browning machine guns in a powered rear turret. It could carry up to 7,000 pounds of bombs in its bomb bay and wing cells, including a 2,000 pounds bomb if required, and had an increased fuel capacity. The Fairey Swordfish Mark I. The Fairey Swordfish started as an in-house project for Fairey, who in 1933 thought that they could sell it to customers once it was up and flying. The Greek Navy showed great interest and put in a provisional order for 80, but eventually backed away from the deal. The designation that Fairey put on the project was TS.R.1. standing for Torpedo, Spotter and Reconnaissance 1. Designed as a 3-seater biplane, it closely followed a specification that they were following for a torpedo bomber for the Air Ministry, for at that time the RAF included the Fleet Air Arm. In the event, the Air Ministry showed more interest in the TSR-1 than the alternate design, and a prototype flew in March 1933. The prototype was destroyed during spin trials in September 1933. In 1934, a modified variant was successfully flown and included trials with the addition of floats, and on completion of these trials 2 were ordered by the RAF under the name Swordfish. In December 1935, the first pre-production aircraft made its maiden flight. In early 1936, the RAF placed an order for 68 aircraft as Swordfish Mark Is. In service, it received the nickname Stringbag after the popular housewife's shopping bag of the time because it appeared to be able to carry anything. In July 1936, the Swordfish formally entered service with 825 Naval Air Squadron. The Swordfish Mark I had a crew of 3, a pilot, observer and air gunner cum radio operator. It had a top speed of 143 miles per hour with a torpedo at 5,000 feet and a range of 522 miles. Its service ceiling while carrying a torpedo was 16,500 feet. It was armed with a single 303 forward-firing Vickers machine gun in the upper front fuselage and 1 Lewis or Vickers machine gun in the rear of the cockpit. Gloucester Gladiator Mark II. The Gloucester Gladiator was another speculation by an aeroplane manufacturer. Gloucester were designing a fighter in parallel with the Gauntlet biplane, and due to problems with the engines specified by the Air Ministry for that project, found themselves with a ready-made replacement in the Gladiator. In September 1934, the prototype made its maiden flight. In April 1935, the prototype was transferred to the RAF, who were skeptical of the performance figures from Gloucester and wanted to try it out for themselves. At about the same time, Gloucester were planning improvements to the design, such as a more powerful engine and a fully enclosed cockpit. On 1 July, the aircraft received its name of Gladiator and an order for 23 aircraft. The first Gladiator Mark I's were delivered in June 1936, while a Mark II version, incorporating a more powerful engine with better machine guns, engine control modifications and arrestor hook etc., was being prototyped for the Fleet Air Arm. This work led to the Gloucester Gladiator Mark II and the Gloucester Sea Gladiator. In February 1937, No. 72 Squadron RAF became the first squadron to be equipped with Gladiators. The Gladiator Mark II was a single-seat fighter aircraft armed with 4 Browning 303 machine guns, one under each wing, and 2 synchronized guns mounted on the fuselage. It had a top speed of 253 miles per hour at 14,500 feet. Its ceiling height was 32,000 feet. Bolton Hall Defiant Mark I. In the 1930s, the bomber will always get through mentality was widespread in Britain. The cost of standing patrols of fighters would have bankrupted the Treasury. However, in 1935, the Air Ministry thought they had come up with a solution: the turret fighter. They reasoned that since German fighter aircraft could not reach Britain from the German airfields, the Luftwaffe's bombers would be unescorted over Britain. A fighter design with a turret added would be able to fly parallel to the bomber stream and shoot down the bombers from the side or underneath with little danger to themselves. Consequently, in 1935 a tender went out for a turret day and night fighter. Bolton Paul had considerable experience with powered turrets and designed such a machine, the Bolton Paul Defiant. Looking like an oversized Hawker Hurricane with a turret situated just behind the pilot, the prototype first flew in August 1937. In April 1937, Bolton Paul had received an order from the Air Ministry for 87 Defiants, essentially off the drawing board, although an unturreted prototype had been nearing completion. In July 1939, the first production Defiant Mark I flew. In February 1938, a follow-on order of 202 Defiant Mark I's had been received, followed by a further 161 3 months later. The Defiant had a top speed of 304 miles per hour at 17,000 feet, with a range of 465 miles. Its service ceiling was 30,000 feet. It had a crew of 2, a pilot and an air gunner. Armament consisted of a powered turret with a 360-degree turning ability that was fitted with 4 Browning 303 machine guns. There was no forward-firing armament built into the aircraft structure itself, because the turret could be pointed forward and fire along the side of the fuselage. The Hawker Hurricane Mark I. The Hawker Hurricane single-seater fighter was the brainchild of Sir Sidney Camm, who, in the early 1930s, was considering a monoplane as a replacement for the Hawker Fury. It would have a retractable landing gear and the new powerful Merlin engine from Rolls-Royce. However, the Air Ministry were not interested in monoplanes, preferring the tried and tested biplane. They did revisit the project and ordered a prototype in late 1934. This prototype first flew in November 1935. The Hurricane went into production for the Air Ministry in June 1936 and entered into squadron service in December 1937. By the time war was declared in September 1939, there were 18 Hurricane squadrons in the RAF. The Hurricane was built along the same lines as a traditional biplane, as Sir Sidney Camm wanted it to be quickly assimilated by the RAF ground crews. Also, it meant it could be repaired on station and not have to be returned to specialist repair depots. The Air Ministry ordered a prototype in late 1934 and it first flew in November 1935. Initially, the Hurricane went into service with a 2-bladed wooden propeller. The Hurricane would go on to evolve with many iterations. The Mark I had a top speed of 340 miles per hour at 21,000 feet. It had a range of 600 miles and a service ceiling of 36,000 feet. Armament was 8 303 Browning machine guns in the wings. the Supermarine Spitfire Mark I. The first prototype Spitfire made its maiden flight in March 1936. The early production was problematic, because the subcontractors in many cases had never made such complex sub-assemblies as those required by Supermarine. As a consequence, the initial order for 310, which was made in 1936 by the RAF, before the prototype had even flown, was facing a late delivery. The RAF received its first two production Spitfire Is in July 1938. The first to go into service was in August 1938 with 19 Squadron RAF. Above 15,000 feet, both the Hurricane and the Spitfire suffered with the guns freezing up, so the flash hiders were removed and fabric tape was used to cover the gun ports, and this stopped the ingress of dirt and dust and also allowed the guns' hot air heaters to stop them from freezing. The Mark I Spitfires had a top speed of 362 miles per hour at 18,500 feet, with a service ceiling of 31,900 feet. They were armed with 8 Browning 303 machine guns in the wings, and from early 1939 all production Spitfires were fitted with bubble canopies, which gave the pilot more headroom and better all-round visibility. The Air Ministry chose a bit of a curate's egg in their selections for tender, good in parts. They were, in their defense, trying to guess the future. Thank God they picked out a few diamonds in amongst the pebbles. The next part of the preface deals with the RAF's order of battle in September 1939 and should be finished in a week or so. But it is a complicated affair, and may take longer.